Amma and Dan became the best of friends, but no one knew in school. They still argued and competed like enemies, but behind closed doors, they were inseparable. They studied together, shared ideas, and even helped each other with school projects. After school, when no one was looking, they would sit under the huge mango tree behind the school and solve difficult math problems together. Amma would chew her lip, her eyebrows knitted in concentration, and Dan would giggle. "You look funny when you're thinking too hard," he teased. Amma would pretend to be angry. "Well, at least I don't look like a hungry goat," she snapped back playfully. However, they would both burst into laughter. They discussed their dreams, their fears, and even their families. Amma told Dan how her father was strict and never had time for her. "He cares more about his business than he does about me," she said, her voice low and sad. Dan listened, his heart aching for her. "You are lucky to have everything you want, but I guess money can't buy happiness," he responded, his eyes tender with understanding. Amma smiled. "Alas, sure it cannot." They had become so close that they could finish each other's sentences. They understood each other's jokes and even gave each other nicknames. Dan called Amma Princess because she was always so proper and right, and Amma called him Smarty because he was so smart. But they kept their friendship a secret in school. They pretended to be opponents, competing fiercely as always. Amma knew her parents would never allow her to be friends with someone like Dan. Her father was a proud man who believed in wealth and status, and Dan didn't want people to think he was only after Amma's money. You see, before now, in a bustling town, there was a school called Hilltop High. It was the finest school in the region, where children from both wealthy and poor families came to learn. But in that school, students were as different as night and day. Amma was the richest girl at Hilltop High. Every morning, a sparkly black limousine would roll up to the school gate and out she stepped, looking like a princess. Her shoes sparkled and her uniform was always immaculate, became spotless, and her hair was always perfectly styled. When she walked, heads turned. When she smiled, the sun seemed to shine brighter. All the girls wanted to be her friend, and all the boys admired her from afar. However, Amma was lonely. Her world was full of everything she could ever want: luxurious toys, fancy clothes, and the latest gadgets. But her heart felt empty. No one knew how she actually felt. No one knew how much she desired a real friend who would like her for who she was, not for what she had. Dan, however, was nothing like Amma. Every morning, he walked for an hour to get to school. His mom sold vegetables by the roadside, working hard just to buy his books and uniform. Dan's uniform was faded, and his shoes were old and worn out. However, his head was always held high, and his eyes sparkled with determination. He was the best student in the class, and no one could beat him, not even the rich kids. Unlike Amma, Dan had no fancy car to take him to school, no brilliant shoes or expensive toys, but he had something even more valuable: a strong spirit. Gave up, no matter how tough things got. His mother always told him, "Dan, education is your key to a better life. Study hard, and the sky will be your limit." Dan never forgot her words. From the very first day, Amma and Dan clashed like fire and water. They competed in everything. In mathematics, Amma would come first, and the class would cheer. But the next week, Dan would beat her in science, and his name would be at the top of the board. Amma's eyes would flash with anger, and Dan would smile proudly. In class debates, their voices would rise above everyone else's. "You don't know what you're saying," Amma would snap, her eyes blazing. "Oh, really? Let's see you prove it then," Dan would fire back, his chin held high. The other students would watch wide-eyed as the two rivals battled with words sharper than knives. They argued and teased each other every day. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Amma would sneer. "I don't think. I know," Dan would respond with a wink. But beneath all the harsh words and irritated glares, something else was blossoming. Their competition was a cover for a bond that was growing stronger each day, growing something neither of them understood. Deep inside, Amma admired Dan's strength and determination. She had everything, but he was always happier. She was surrounded by riches, but he was richer in spirit. And Dan, although he never admitted it, admired Amma's courage. She never backed down, no matter how tough the challenge. But they were too stubborn to admit it, even to themselves. They hid their true feelings under playful insults and fierce competition, too proud to show any weakness. They were like lions fighting for the same crown, too fierce to call a truce. And so, Amma and Dan continued to clash daily, not knowing that their hearts were slowly growing closer, not knowing that behind the competition, love was quietly waiting, like a tiny seed ready to bloom. However, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Amma struggled to carry her project materials to the car, her hands slipping as the rain poured. Dan watched her from the window, hesitating at first, but his kind heart wouldn't allow him to ignore her. He ran over and offered his help. Amma was surprised but accepted, her cheeks turning red. Together they carried the materials to her car, laughing at how silly they looked, drenched by the rain. Amma's driver watched in shock. He had never seen her laugh like that, especially not with Dan. "Thanks," Amma said softly, her eyes sparkling. Dan's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly looked away. "No problem," he responded, trying to act cool. As the car drove off, Dan stood there, his heart racing. For the first time, he saw a different side of Amma. She was human, just like him. Amma too couldn't stop thinking about the moment, realizing there was more to Dan than she had ever known. Thinking about him, she realized Dan was more than just her rival. He was strong, humble, and courageous. They started to notice each other more, their hearts growing closer. Even though they concealed their feelings behind playful insults, they were more alike than they realized. And deep down, something was changing, a feeling they didn't understand. Amma and Dan's competition slowly became something neither of them expected, friendship. But it was a secret friendship, hidden from the world like a treasure buried in the ground. They became best friends, and their hearts grew closer with each secret conversation. They learned each other's fears and goals, their hopes and worries. Amma shared how lonely she felt despite having everything, and Dan told her about his struggles at home, about his mom who worked so hard just to keep him in school. Amma's heart ached for him. She wanted to help, but she knew he wouldn't accept her money. "I don't need your pity," Dan would say, his eyes fierce. So she helped him in other ways, by encouraging him, by being there for him, and he did the same for her, showing her that life was about more than riches. Their bond grew stronger, like roots growing deep into the earth. They were no longer competitors, but friends who depended on each other. But they were careful, never showing their closeness in public. However, secrets don't stay hidden forever. One afternoon, they were laughing and talking outside the school gate, waiting for Amma's limousine. They were so happy they didn't notice the black car parked across the road. Amma's father sat inside, watching them with cold, indignant eyes. His face became pink with rage as he saw his daughter giggling with a poor boy. "How dare she shame me like this?" he muttered under his breath, his hands clenched into fists. That night, as Amma walked into the house, her father's voice thundered through the living room. "Amma!" he called, his voice sharp like a knife. Amma's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him sound so angry before. She walked in slowly, her head bowed. "Yes, Daddy?" Her father's eyes were blazing with anger. "I saw you giggling with that boy today," he growled, his voice cold and vicious. "You are a Williams. You should never be seen with a poor boy like Dan. He is not your class." Amma's heart broke. She opened her mouth to explain, but her father's hand shot up, stopping her. "I don't need excuses. You will never talk to him again, do you understand?" Tears welled up in Amma's eyes, but she nodded. "Yes, Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her father's face softened only a little. "Good. Remember who you are, Amma. You are my daughter, and I won't have you mixing with people who are beneath us." Amma felt like a heavy stone was sitting on her chest. She ran to her room, threw herself on her bed, and cried. Her heart ached because she knew she couldn't stop being friends with Dan. She needed him. He was the only person who understood her. The next day at school, Amma tried to avoid Dan, but he noticed. "Hey, Princess, why are you running away from me?" he asked, his eyes full of worry. Amma looked down, unable to meet his gaze. I just don't want people to see us together," she lied, her heart breaking with each word. Dan's face fell. "Oh, okay," he said softly, his shoulders sagging. Alma watched him walk away, his head down and his steps heavy. Her chest tightened, and she felt like crying again, but she couldn't let him go. She just couldn't. That afternoon, when school was over and everyone had left, she found Dan sitting under the big mango tree, his face sad and his eyes far away. She walked up to him and sat down beside him. "I'm sorry, Smarty," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Dan looked at her, his eyes softening. "Then why did you say those things?" Alma's eyes filled with tears. "My father saw us yesterday. He was so angry. He said I should never speak to you again because you're not my class," she confessed, her voice trembling. Dan looked away, his jaw tight. "I see, because I'm poor." Alma grabbed his hand, holding it tightly. "I don't care about that. You're my best friend, and I don't want to lose you," she cried, her tears flowing freely. Dan looked at her, his eyes shining with understanding. "Oh, certainly." Alma nodded, wiping her tears. "Sure, but we should keep it a secret. No one can know, especially my father." Dan smiled, his heart feeling lighter. "All right, Princess, our little secret," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. They sat under the mango tree, their hands clasped together and their hearts beating as one. They knew their friendship was forbidden, but they didn't care. They were willing to fight for it, even if it meant keeping it a secret from the world. And so, they continued to meet secretly, laughing and talking as if nothing was wrong. They were happy, but deep inside, they knew their secret wouldn't stay hidden forever. Years passed, and Amma and Dan graduated from their secondary school, ready to join a university. Amma's parents were excited. They planned for her to go to the prestigious University of Bradford. "You'll study at the best university," her father said proudly, his eyes shining with ambition. "You'll be the smartest, richest girl in this town." Amma forced a smile, but her heart was heavy. If she went to the big city, she would leave Dan behind. She would never see his smile, never hear his laughter, never feel the warmth of his hand holding hers. The thought of losing him made her chest tighten like a rope around her heart. Meanwhile, Dan was worried. He knew Amma would go to a big university, but he couldn't even afford to apply. His mother was struggling just to keep him in school. Where would he find the money for college? He kept his fears hidden, pretending to be happy, but inside, his heart was breaking. Amma saw the concern in his eyes one afternoon as they sat under the mango tree. "What's wrong, Smarty?" she asked, her voice filled with worry, whispered her voice smooth and gentle. Dan forced a grin. "Nothing, Princess, I'm fine." But Amma wasn't satisfied. She took his hand and squeezed it. "Tell me the truth." Dan sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I don't have money for college. I'd have to stay back and help my mom at the market." Amma's heart sank. She couldn't imagine life without Dan. "No, you can't stay behind. We have to go to university together," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dan looked away, his eyes full of pain. "I wish we could, but we come from different worlds, Amma. You're wealthy, I'm poor. It's not that easy." Amma's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving Dan behind. She had to do something. And then an idea came to her. A crazy idea, a risky idea. But it was the only way. She would fail her entrance exam on purpose. "If he can't go, then I won't go either," she whispered to herself, her eyes determined. The primary exam came, and Amma sat in the hall, the paper in front of her. The questions were easy, but she stared at them, her pen still. She could feel her heart pounding, her hands sweating. "I can do this," she whispered, taking a deep breath. She left most of the questions blank, her heart heavy with worry but firm with resolve. When the results came out, Amma's name was not on the list. Her father was confused. "Amma, how did you fail?" he asked, his eyebrows drawn in concern. "You've always been top of your class." Amma looked at her feet, her heart racing. "I don't know, Daddy," she lied, her voice small. "Maybe I was frightened." Her father sighed, his face softening. "It's okay, you may take the next one." However, Amma failed the second examination too. This time her father was furious. "Amma, what is wrong with you?" he shouted, his eyes blazing with anger. "Are you playing games with your destiny?" Amma's hands shook, but she kept her head down. I tried, Daddy. I don't know what happened." Her voice was weak, but her heart was firm. He gave her one final chance. "If you fail again, You'll bring disgrace to this family, he warned, his voice cold. But Amma had already made up her mind. She took the third examination, and once again she failed on purpose. This time her father knew the truth. He stormed into her room, his face dark with fury. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted, his voice like thunder. "Do you think this is a joke?" Amma's lips trembled, but she stayed silent. Her heart was heavy, but she wouldn't change her mind. She wouldn't leave until Dan could join her. Her father's anger grew, his fists clenched. "Is it because of that boy?" he demanded, his voice sharp as a knife. "Are you throwing away your future for him?" Amma's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't answer. She turned her face away, her eyes full of tears. She couldn't tell him the truth. He wouldn't understand. Her father took away her privileges, no phone, no outings, no visitors. She was grounded, locked away like a prisoner. But Amma didn't care. Her heart was with Dan, and she was willing to wait. Meanwhile, during all the time that Amma had failed her exams, Dan had managed to accumulate enough money for college with the help of his relatives, his mom, and himself by working hard as a bricklayer on construction sites. Dan studied day and night. He knew Amma was waiting for him, and he refused to let her down. He stayed up late, reading by candlelight, his eyes burning with determination. He borrowed books, asked questions, and practiced until his hands were tired and his head ached. Amma secretly cheered him on, sending him notes through a mutual friend. "I believe in you," her notes would say, her words full of hope. Dan would smile, his heart warm with gratitude. Dan didn't know why she was waiting. Amma widened her eyes in surprise. "What do you mean?" Dan's voice turned heavy with pain. "Look at you, Amma. You are rich, stunning, and smart. You belong to an extraordinary world. I'm just a bad boy trying to survive. We do not belong together." Amma's heart broke. She grabbed his hand tightly. "I don't care about money or my father's rules. I love you, Dan," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Dan's expression softened, his eyes filled with pain. "But the world cares, Amma. People see us and think I'm only with you for your money, and sometimes I start to believe them." Amma shook her head fiercely. "That's not true. You are the smartest, bravest person I know. You mean more to me than all the money in the world," she said, her voice strong and steady. Dan looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I want to believe you, but I'm scared, Amma. What if your father is right? What if I'm not good enough for you?" Amma's chest tightened. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You are enough, Dan. You are more than enough. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise," she whispered, her eyes shining with love. Dan's eyes filled with tears, his heart aching. He wanted to believe her, but the voices in his head wouldn't stop. They whispered, tormenting him. He pulled away from her touch, his face hardening. "I need to be alone, Amma," he said coldly. "Please, just leave me alone." Amma's heart shattered. She reached out to him, but he stood up and walked away, his back stiff and his steps heavy. She watched him leave, her chest aching with pain. "Why is he pushing me away?" she cried, her tears falling like rain. "Doesn't he see how much I love him?" She sat alone in the garden, broken. The boy she loved was slipping away, and she didn't know how to save him. Dan, on the other hand, walked to his room, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. He loved Amma more than anything, but he was afraid of losing her. He was afraid of not being good enough. He was terrified of the future. Their love was strong, but the walls between their worlds were even stronger. As they drifted apart, they both wondered if love was enough to overcome all obstacles. Amma missed Dan terribly. She missed his smile, his laughter, and the way he looked at her with eyes full of love. She couldn't understand why he was pushing her away. Maybe he's just confused. Maybe he needs a reminder of how much I love him, she thought, a small smile forming on her lips. She decided to surprise him. "I'll cook his favorite meal," she whispered to herself, her eyes shining with hope. She spent the entire afternoon cooking jollof rice with fried plantains, just the way Dan loved it. She packed the food neatly in a basket and rushed to his apartment, her heart beating with excitement. She reached his door and was about to knock when she heard laughter inside. A familiar laugh, Sonia's laugh. Amma's heart skipped a beat. "Why is Sonia here?" "Did you betray me, Dan?" she cried, her voice damaged. "I cherished you. I gave up everything for you. Why?" She stayed there for hours, crying until she had no more tears left. Her heart was shattered, her trust broken, and her love turned into pain. Meanwhile, back in Dan's apartment, Sonia was smiling triumphantly. She was beautiful and smart. She knew exactly how to get what she wanted. She had been jealous of Amma for a long time. Why does she get everything? Beauty, wealth, and even Dan's love, she thought bitterly. No, I won't let her have him. He belongs to me. Sonia began visiting Dan often, pretending to be concerned about him. She whispered toxic words into his ears. Amma will never be yours, Dan. Her family is too rich. They will marry her off to a wealthy man. You're just wasting your time. She lied, her voice sweet and soothing. Dan believed her. The voices in his head grew louder. She's right. Amma will leave you someday. She's too good for you. His heart grew heavy, and he convinced himself that he didn't deserve Amma's love. Sonia saw her chance and took it. She pretended to care, always by his side, comforting him with fake tears and gentle words. I am here for you, Dan. I understand your pain, she whispered, her arms wrapped around him. Dan's heart became vulnerable. He needed comfort, and Sonia gave it to him. He started to believe that she was the one who truly loved him. One evening, as they sat together in his apartment, Sonia leaned in and kissed him softly. At first, Dan was surprised, but he didn't push her away. He closed his eyes and kissed her back, his heart full of confusion and pain. Amma saw it all. She saw the betrayal, the lies, and the heartbreak. She ran away, her chest aching, her world falling apart. For days she locked herself in her room, crying until her eyes were swollen and her voice was hoarse. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, her heart was shattered, and she felt like she couldn't breathe. Her parents were concerned, but Amma refused to tell them what was wrong. She didn't want them to know about Dan or the pain she was going through. I'll take care of it on my own, she whispered to herself, wiping her tears. After days of crying, Amma stood in front of her mirror, her eyes red and puffy. Enough. I won't cry anymore, she whispered, her voice cold and empty. If Dan can betray me, then love is useless. I won't love anyone again. She took a deep breath and wiped her tears. I will focus on my studies. I will be the best girl in this university. I don't need Dan. I don't need love, she vowed, her heart turning to stone. She buried her love deep inside her, locking it away where nobody could reach it. She went back to school, her face cold and her heart guarded. She ignored Dan and pretended he didn't exist. She laughed with her friends, but her laughter was hollow. She smiled, but her eyes were empty. Amma became the best girl in her class, the pride of her teachers, and the envy of her classmates. But her heart was broken, and no amount of success could heal the pain she felt. She decided to forget Dan, to erase him from her life. But no matter how hard she tried, his face haunted her dreams, his voice echoed in her heart, and his betrayal burned like fire in her soul. She had loved him with all her heart, but he had broken her, and now she didn't believe in love anymore. Years passed, and they graduated from college, each taking different paths. Amma became the most beautiful and intelligent young woman in the city. Her beauty was like the morning sun, bright and perfect. Her intelligence made her the pride of her parents. They were proud of her achievements, but they were concerned. You're growing older, Amma. It's time you got married, her mom said one night, her eyes full of hope. Amma forced a smile. Yes, Mama, but in her heart she did not care about marriage. Love had betrayed her once, and she did not want to feel that pain again. Her parents arranged her marriage to a wealthy man named Chai. He was rich and handsome, the kind of man every girl dreamed of. You'll be happy with him, her father promised, his voice firm and sure. Amma agreed, not because she wanted to, but because she wanted to please her parents. Maybe I will learn to love him. Maybe this is my destiny, she thought, her heart heavy. The wedding was grand, with music, dancing, and laughter. Amma wore a lovely white gown, her face covered with a bright smile, but behind her smile, her heart was cold and empty. She walked down the aisle, her hands shaking, her eyes scanning the crowd. She secretly wished to see Dan's face one last time, but he was nowhere to be found. After the wedding, Amma moved into Chi's mansion. The house was large and beautiful, with sparkling chandeliers and luxurious furniture, but it was cold like Chi's heart. At first, Chi was sweet and charming. He showered her with gifts and praised her beauty. But soon, his true colors began to show. He became cold and distant, his face hard like stone. He cheated openly, bringing other women into their home without shame. One night, Amma caught him with another woman. Her heart sank. "Chi, who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Chi's eyes were cold. "She's my lover. I can do whatever I want," he responded, his voice cruel and sharp. Amma's chest tightened. "But I am your wife," she cried, her eyes filled with tears. Chi laughed, his voice mocking. "You're just a trophy, a pretty face to show off. I don't love you, Amma. I never did." Amma's heart shattered. She felt like she was drowning, her chest heavy with pain. She tried to speak, but her voice was lost in her sobs. Chi's face became dark. "Stop crying, you're embarrassing me," he shouted, raising his hand. Before Amma could react, his palm struck her cheek, the sound echoing through the room. Amma stumbled, her face burning with pain. She looked at him in shock, her eyes wide with fear. "Chi, you hit me." Chi's eyes were cold, his face unfeeling. "You deserved it. Next time, keep your mouth shut," he snapped before walking away, leaving her alone and broken. Amma cried herself to sleep, her heart aching with pain and betrayal. She felt trapped in a loveless marriage, her dream shattered, her hope lost. She endured the pain for months, hiding her bruises behind makeup and fake smiles. But the abuse grew worse, and Amma couldn't take it anymore. She gathered her courage and left, ending the marriage in a bitter divorce. Her parents were furious. "You disgraced us. How could you leave your husband?" her father yelled, his face red with anger. Amma bowed her head, her heart heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry, Daddy, but I couldn't stay. He was cruel." Her father's eyes were cold. "You're a Williams. You should marry a man of wealth and status. I don't care how you feel." Without giving her time to heal, her parents arranged another marriage, this time to a man named Desmond. He was rich, powerful, and respected, but behind his charming smile, he was a monster. Desmond was controlling. He didn't let Amma go out, didn't let her talk to her friends, and watched her every move. "You belong to me," he would whisper, his grip tight on her arm. Amma felt like a prisoner in her own home. She was lonely, isolated, and miserable. She tried to please him, but nothing worked. Desmond was cold and heartless, his eyes always watching, his voice always commanding. The marriage ended in another painful divorce. Amma returned to her parents. Her parents didn't console her. Instead, they blamed her. "You are a failure as a wife," her father yelled. "You've disgraced our family." They arranged another marriage, then another, and yet another. Amma went through 3 more marriages, each ending in disaster. One husband was a gambler who lost all his money and blamed her for his failures. Another was a womanizer who brought different women into their home. The last was a drunkard who beat her without reason. Amma was broken, her heart shattered, her spirit crushed. She was lonely, unloved, and hopeless. No one saw her pain, no one heard her cries. She was like a bird with broken wings, trapped in a cage she couldn't escape. One night, as she sat alone in her room, tears streaming down her face, she whispered, "Maybe I should have fought harder for Dan. Maybe I should have chosen love over wealth." She remembered Dan's smile, his laughter, his gentle touch. Her heart ached with longing. "Dan, I miss you," she whispered, her voice breaking. She begged her parents to let her return to Dan. "I love him. I always have. Please let me be with him," she pleaded, her eyes full of tears, but her father's face was hard. "We do not want to hear that name again. We cannot be associated with poverty," he shouted, his voice cold and final. Amma's heart sank. She was trapped, chained by her family's pride and wealth. She wiped her tears and accepted her fate. "I will never be happy. I will never find love again," she whispered, her heart heavy with pain. She was rich but lonely, beautiful but broken, surrounded by wealth but empty inside. She had everything, yet she had nothing. Every night she cried herself to sleep, wishing she could turn back time and fight for the only boy who had ever truly loved her. After Amma's last divorce, pain and loneliness became her constant companions. She moved back to her parents' house, feeling like a shadow of herself. Her heart was heavy, her spirit broken, and her dreams shattered, but her troubles were far from over. One morning, as the sun struggled to rise behind thick clouds, Amma heard a loud scream from her parents' room. "Mama!" she cried, rushing in to find her mother lying on the ground, her face pale and her body shaking. Her father was panicking, his hands trembling as he tried to lift his wife. "Call the doctor! Call the doctor!" he shouted, his voice breaking with worry. They rushed her to the best hospital in the city. The doctors examined her, shaking their heads in confusion. "We do not recognize her condition. It is serious, but we cannot find the cause," they said, their faces dark with fear. Amma's father was desperate. He took his wife to many hospitals, paying large sums of money, but no doctor could help. Her mother's health continued to worsen, her body growing weaker each day. One evening, as Amma sat by her mother's bedside, her heart aching with worry, a nurse walked in. "There is a specialist in the neighboring city. He is the best doctor around. People say he performs miracles," she whispered, her voice full of hope. Amma's father didn't hesitate. "Let's go. Let's see him," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with desperation. The next morning, they traveled to the hospital in the neighboring city. It was a large, beautiful hospital, clean and sparkling like a palace. The nurses were kind, the doctors were polite, and the air smelled of hope. They waited anxiously in the reception area, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Finally, a nurse came out and called, "Dr. Dan will see you now." Amma's heart stopped, her breath caught in her throat. "Did she say Dan?" she whispered, her hands trembling. Her father didn't hear her. He was too focused on his wife, his face pale with worry. They followed the nurse down a long hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. They entered a large office with a massive desk and a tall bookshelf filled with medical books. A man stood with his back to them, his white coat clean and crisp, his shoulders strong and broad. "Doctor, the patients are here," the nurse announced before leaving the room. The man turned around and Amma's heart skipped a beat. It was him, Dan, the boy she had loved, the boy she had lost. Dan's face was calm, his eyes gentle but distant. He looked at them, his eyes stopping on Amma's face for a brief moment before turning to her parents. "Good morning, I am Dr. Dan. How can I help you?" Dan stood there, his voice firm and emotionless. Amma's father, his face turning crimson with shame, remembered the day he had insulted Dan. He had called him poor and worthless. But now, here stood the same boy, no longer poor but a successful doctor, the only one who could save his wife's life. Amma's father lowered his head, his shoulders slumping. "Please forgive me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My wife is very sick. We have been to many hospitals, but no one could help. Please save her," he begged, his eyes brimming with tears. "If you were Dan, would you help save the life of Amma's mother, the very woman whose father once called you poor and wretched?" What a gripping scenario. Makes you think about the power of forgiveness and the strength it takes to do the right thing. Don't forget to subscribe for part 2 to find out how it all unfolds.